guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today in this video we're going to be interviewing Dr. Anna Overby, who focuses on molecular infection medicine, and she has her own laboratory at the Umeå University in Sweden. So let's get right into this fascinating interview.
TBE is a virus disease which is very prominent in Europe and Sweden. The cases are increasing. It's causing very severe brain disease, and the patients, 50%, doesn't really recover after being sick. One of the main reason why vaccination works is because the body generates antibodies, and these are really important to protect you from disease. Viruses are very fascinating, and research is a fantastic job.
So here guys, we have the woman herself, Dr. Overby, Anna Overby. And well, today we're going to be interviewing her on her work on fighting against viruses. Because you work at the TBE, can you explain to us first of all what that actually means?
So TBE stands for Tick-Borne Encephalitis virus, and it's a virus similar to SARS, but this virus is transmitted by ticks. So if you're bitten by a tick that contains the virus, the tick will then inject the virus into your skin, where it can multiply and infect you. And the encephalitis part means that the virus goes to the brain and causes inflammation within the brain. So it's a very, very severe disease.
Okay, and you are you're specified in that domain.
Yes, so this is the topic that I'm researching, yes.
All right. And well, first of all, what inspired you to do what you're doing? What inspired you to get into this career?
So I always liked biology when I was small, and I also liked chemistry and math. So I studied engineering, and then I wanted to have experience from abroad. So I live in Sweden, and I was born here. But I went to Scotland, to Glasgow, and studied viruses, and that sort of opened my whole world for these small things that cause disease, and that's sort of how I got hooked on to study viruses.
From a young age, and you always wanted to get into chemistry, sciences, and you always had this passion for actually having like this vast domain that nowadays is like the new revolutionary topic. And you now are here working on working against viruses, and especially TBE, Tick-Borne Encephalitis.
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 Yes.
All right. Okay. And well, actually, when did you start?
That started when I studied in Scotland, and that was 2002 and 2003. So it was many, many years ago.
And well, actually, how did you go from studying cells to focus on viruses like Tick-Borne Encephalitis, which is also TBE?
Yeah, so viruses needs to have a cell to be able to multiply and spread. So the step from studying viruses to studying cells is very intertwined, because you need to know the cellular processes to understand how the virus is sort of hijacking these processes for generating or sort of reprogramming the cell into becoming a viral factory to be able to spread. So we don't really distinguish cells and viruses. We study both, because it's a very linked interaction between them.
All right, so you started focusing on cells, and then from that, you could see that there was a big connection. So then you got into Tick-Borne Encephalitis.
Just say TBE.
Okay, TBE. Then you got into TBE.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just say TBE.
Okay. And actually, why did you get interested in TBE virus, and what cool discoveries has your lab made?
So, TBV is a virus disease which is very prominent in Europe and Sweden. The cases are increasing. It's causing very severe brain disease, and the patients, 50% doesn't really recover after being sick. So it's a very important disease here in Europe and Sweden, and we don't have any medications or treatment for the virus. So the people really rely on their own immune system to defend itself from the virus. So that really intrigued me because there's so many things that we don't understand about the disease. So my lab, we are studying how the cellular system tries to prevent the disease. So
you
the
try to
very
get
early immune
Mhm.
system.
So you got into basically the dark matter of medication. Basically, like the thing that nobody really knows how to do, but they know it's there.
Yeah. So we're trying to figure out what the virus is doing so that we can understand what the targets we should go for is when we develop medication in the future.
All right. So your lab studies how TB virus infects certain cells that are in your brain, and then TB eventually goes in your brain. Can you explain how how that works, how that process works?
So after you get bitten by a tick, the virus is injected into the skin where it multiplies in the skin, and then it's transported and spreads via the blood, and then it crosses the brain barriers, and it really focus on infecting neurons. And neurons are very, very important cells in the brain for all the processes like vision and speech and
Thinking,
movement.
yeah, it's like the brain
So
cells.
yes, that's one type of the brain cells. And when the virus infects these cells are destroyed. And that's why it's a very severe disease. It also triggers inflammation and immune response that also can be harmful for the brain. So we are studying why certain cells are infected, why other cells are not, and how the cells respond.
Okay. And well, you teamed up with a lot of different experts during the pandemic, the COVID-19. How did working together help your research? And well, which were like the toughest part of this pandemic? Because we know that for those who had to go to school, they had to stay home. So, how did it help you, and which were actually like the hardest parts in doing that?
So my research, tick-borne encephalitis virus, we have to do the work in high security laboratories. And when the pandemic hit, the SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus causing COVID, we also need to work with these ones in high security laboratories. So my lab was really very well prepared to be able to directly start to investigating SARS-CoV-2. So that's what we did right away. During the pandemic, we also started collaborating with a lot of clinicians to really link what we see in the lab to what is actually happening with the patients. So it was a really good experience to have this translational research to validate what they find in the clinic in our more simple laboratory settings to get to the mechanisms.
All right.
Yeah.
And well, you came from, so when there was the pandemic, then you came from TBE to COVID-19 and you were focused on actually that. And then, well, which were your biggest challenges in doing this?
So in Sweden, we didn't really have a lockdown. So half of my lab continued working with TBV, and the rest was switching over to work with SARS-CoV-2. And the challenges was that there was a lot of different projects coming, new projects coming because of all the collaborations that were started. So it was hard to really have the time to manage all the projects. of course, it's a problem when people getting sick, but we didn't really have that much infection in Umeå where I live and where I work. So we were. It was quite okay, but it was a lot of new methods and a lot of new collaborations and projects that were running in parallel.
All right. And actually, you were saying it's called SARS-CoV-2.
Yeah, that's the virus
Okay.
causing the disease COVID-19. So you have the disease and you have the virus.
Oh, isn't that the same thing?
So SARS-CoV-2 is the virus. That's the name of the virus. And
Okay.
that when it infects the human, it's called COVID-19. So that's the disease.
Okay. What did you find out when you were using blood from people who were sick from COVID-19 but then they recovered? Like, what did you actually find out when you were using their blood and then using it for diseased people?
So, when you have had a disease, for example, COVID-19, the immune system in the blood generates something called antibodies. And these antibodies bind to the virus and can then neutralize them and take away the disease.
Mhm.
So, what we did, we took the blood from patients that had recovered and gave them to patients that were sick. And in our studies, we didn't really find that helped the patients because the patients that we gave them to did already have a good immune response against the virus, so it didn't help. But later on, other people they use this blood and antibodies and transfer to people that have a weakened immune system that doesn't generate these very, very important antibodies, and there it really helped. And when we get vaccination, for example, one of the main reason why vaccination works is because the body generates antibodies, and these are really important to protect you from disease.
Okay. And well, what have you learned from the pandemic, and how has it changed the way that you approach your research in viruses?
So the pandemic has really taught us to collaborate with clinicians and with other researchers. So I would say that many researchers from other fields, not only virologists, but also people, clinicians that didn't really work with viruses, came to the field, and then we made really exciting new research projects. So I think that the climate is much more open now for collaboration after the pandemic.
Mhm. And well, to be like, what is the actual specificity of Sweden in the biology domain? Because we know that on this channel, I've already interviewed like other biologists, and one like in Berkeley, she was working on how emotions and how and feelings can actually help to fight against malaria. And well, what is the specificity of Sweden, in the terms of in biology?
So Sweden is a very small country. So research-wise, but we are very good at studying tick-borne encephalitis virus. So we have both clinicians down in Stockholm that is really good at
TBE.
studying the
Yeah.
immunology and the immune response against TBV, and we are also good at mechanistic studies on this virus.
And now we come to the last question. What is your message to the people watching this video? What do you want to tell them?
Say that viruses are very fascinating, and research is a fantastic job.
Okay, thank you. So it was a great interview, and thank you for being here on this video today. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.